Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 4 at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to Texas Motor Speedway. And the reason I wanted to go to Texas is because the recent reconfiguration of the track presents a lot of issues both when driving as well as setting up the car. And I wanted to go ahead and tackle those and just see how all of that was going to work here in NASCAR Heat 4 with the addition of the new physics. So we're going to be talking about the Cup cars, Xfinity, as well as the trucks. We'll talk a little bit about lap times and quite a bit about how to adjust the car. So let's get started. One of the big changes for the physics in NASCAR Heat 4 is the addition of tire wear. Now, tire wear is going to have a huge effect on the setup that you're running, so it makes sense that we need to, before we get into setup discussion, talk a little bit about the options that I use while I'm testing for these setups. So we'll start off in the options menu under the gameplay tab, and then we're going to scroll down to tire wear and fuel consumption. Normally I do this on 2X. I don't like to go any higher because I do like long green flag runs, but I understand that some of you like to go all the way up to 4X. Player tire wear rate, I like more wear. I like maximum tire wear, so I generally test on more wear and less grip under the grip fall off. So keep that in mind. If you're playing with different settings such as less wear and more grip, then that's going to change the setup that you're going to want to use in the races. So keep that in mind as we're talking about setups. What I'll try to do in each video is let you know the particular settings, because I don't go for maximum tire wear at every track, just where I feel that it is appropriate. And also keep in mind on the driving tab, there is a setting that you'll need to match up for the AI. So if you want maximum tire wear, then you need to have that on both the player car and the AI car. Or if you're going for less tire wear and more grip, then change that for the AI as well. Before we jump into the setups themselves, let's talk a little bit about the track as well as some lap times in each of the three series. So Texas presents a lot of challenges, both driving and setup, with the new reconfiguration. Turns 1 and 2 now have less banking than turns 3 and 4, which means that some of the things you're going to want to do to help the car in turns 1 and 2 will sometimes backfire on you when you get to 3 and 4. For example, if the car is handling really good through turns 1 and 2, it's rotating nicely, then when you get to 3 and 4, it's probably going to be loose because you got more banking down there on that end of the track, and you don't need all the additional rotation that you've dialed into the car. So keep that in mind when you're doing the setup. You're going to have to make some compromises in either the setup or your driving or both. At Texas, I've also spent more time in 4X with max tire wear. Now, I would normally run max tire wear here, but the 4X is a bit of a change for me. But since I've heard from so many of you guys that you really enjoy running 4X, I decided to spend a little bit more time there. And what I have found is that 4X is really no different than 1X, 2X, or whatever. Everything simply happens much quicker. Everything is more condensed in the 4X format, which means that ultimately any driving mistakes you make will be penalized heavily and very quickly. If you slide the tires on exit, entry, wherever, you will ruin the tires very quickly in 4X. So it just doesn't give you that comfort level of knowing that you've got lap after lap to dial in the car and you're driving. You have to be pretty much mistake-free from the very beginning, or you're going to suffer the penalty with the tires. So now let's talk a little bit about some lap times. I spent very little time worried about speed here and qualifying type setup. Instead, I spent nearly all of my time on the long run and making sure that the car was both stable and had enough rotation to it to really allow you to maintain as much speed as possible over that long run. So in the Cup cars, somewhere around a 29.1, 29.2 is about where I was on the fastest laps. But again, that really didn't mean anything to me because with max fall off in the tires, you're going to be well below that by the end of the run. Xfinity cars, somewhere around a 29.4, 29.5 was sufficient. In the trucks, 30.1, 30.2, somewhere in that range, and you should be just fine. Both to start up front or very close to the front and then run up front during the races on the long run. So that'll take care of the preliminary information. Let's now move on to the setups. What we're going to see when we move from the Cup to Xfinity and trucks are setups that are very similar in a lot of ways, but have some important differences that I really needed to make in order to have the car or truck handle the way I prefer over that long run. So we start with the shock settings. I have used a lot of different shock settings at this track in testing, and really the 3.5 was a very solid baseline. You're going to have a lot of ability here to adjust and really to stiffen up some of the corners of the car and get some better reactions, but that's going to be a very individual thing. So the 3.5 setup works really good here for release. Moving on to the weight settings, 53% nose weight and 53% wedge. This felt really good in the Cup car. We're going to see something a little bit different when we move to Xfinity and trucks, but this really helped to stabilize the car both on entry as well as on exit. If you're getting tight overall, especially on the long run, if the car is not freeing up over the long run, then that means you got some room to free it up in the setup. And you can do that by reducing the amount of front weight, also reducing the amount of wedge. Wedge I generally use to adjust how quickly the car rotates through the corner. If the car is rotating too quickly, I increase the wedge. If it's not rotating enough for me, then I decrease the wedge. Moving on to the springs, 1,200 pounds in the left front, 1,100 pounds in the right front. This is another area where I tried out a lot of different settings, and they all work to varying degrees just depending on how you drive it. I also tried out on the left front about 1,000 pounds, 900 pounds, and then maxing out the right front spring at 1,200 pounds. That also works. It just gives you a little bit more right front to lean on, particularly on corner entry, and can have a stabilizing effect on the car. But I chose to go the opposite on the front springs, with the left front being a little bit higher than the right front, simply to help the car rotate just a little bit more on entry. Moving to the rear of the car, 500 pounds left rear, 600 pounds right rear. Now normally it's pretty difficult to keep this much rear spring under the car over the long run, but that's where some of these other settings like the front weight, the wedge, and so on really help out. But if you find yourself struggling, particularly over the long run, losing the back end of the car and wanting to spin out on corner exit, then by all means drop both of the rear springs. Try something like 350 and 450. So make a big change, see if that helps you on the long run, and then that'll give you an idea of the direction you need to go. Tire settings, once again, a lot of adjustability here, but I tried to standardize it as much as possible across the 3 series. 20 pounds on the left side, 50 pounds right front, 48 on the right rear. I like to run a little bit less on the right rear just to keep it under me over the course of a long run and keep that grip long term. Miscellaneous settings, +3 on the left front camber, -3 on the right front camber. You can use a lot of different settings here. I've used up to a ±5, and it was perfectly fine. It didn't run through the tires. What really runs through your tires is being too loose or too tight. Pushing the car too hard in particular will ruin the tire. So it's not as much the camber. What you're looking for out of the camber is a good feel out of the car whenever you get into the corner. And +3 and -3 works out well, but I have also tried using even less camber, and it also works out just fine. Front sway bar is at 1.315. That also helps to stabilize the car in the front end and help offset some of the higher rear springs that we're using. Track bar at 10 inches on the left side, 10.5 inches on the right side. Track bar is something that can really help out or hurt the car depending on how you use it. If you find that you're too loose overall, drop the track bar, particularly on both sides, but particularly on the right side. Because generally I find that people are talking about getting loose on exit, and lowering that right side track bar will certainly help out with that. If you need a little help on entry, maybe the car isn't rotating as much as you would like, try increasing the left side track bar, and that will help out with that. Brake bias really isn't needed here except for in traffic, and for those of you who like to trail brake on corner entry. The lower brake bias is going to put more brake to the rear of the car and free up the car under braking, and increasing the brake bias will have the opposite effect and actually tighten the car up under braking. So you can use that as a very valuable setup tool to adjust how the car drives, just depending on whether or not you use brake or how much brake you use. Grill tape, not really a huge issue, so I didn't push the limit too much with 40%. You can go higher than that and still most likely be fine. But again, as we've talked about in previous videos, because the grill tape really doesn't help your downforce or reduce the drag, there's not much point in trying to push the limits on that. Wheel lock and steering offset, both very standard for me. The steering offset is something you'll want to be careful with. You get that number too high, you'll actually introduce a pull to the right in the car. So just a little bit of steering offset seems to work good for me, regardless of what camber I've got in it. But of course, as always, adjust to your particular preferences. All right, so moving on to the gear settings and specifically the rear end ratio. So 325 is where I have it right now, but I have had good luck with up to 333 or 340, and also coming down to something like a 310. It's all about whether you want to maximize early in the run or late in the run, or try to get a compromise of both. 325 works out pretty good as a middle of the road, but there is a lot of adjustability there. That takes care of the Cup cars. Now let's move over to Xfinity. We're not going to spend a great deal of time in either Xfinity or trucks because we've already talked about the majority of the setup adjustments in the Cup car. So let's talk very quickly about a few of the differences as we move from Cup to Xfinity. I started off with an identical setup in the Xfinity car to the Cup car and quickly found out that it was just too tight. The car didn't rotate as much as I needed to. So I came to the weight settings and adjusted both the front weight and the wedge to reduce those, and that really helps the car to rotate. So just dropping 1% on wedge really allows the car to rotate better through the corner and carry more speed. Spring settings, very much the same. Miscellaneous settings, very much the same with the exception of the track bar, which is a little bit higher, once again, to allow the car to carry more speed through the corner and continue that rotation. Also, you see in the gear settings, the rear end ratio is at 333 as opposed to the 325, but again, there's a lot of adjustability there, and you can find the one that works best for you. Now let's move on to the trucks. The trucks are very similar for me to the Xfinity car in terms of setup, but there are a couple of changes that I do want to point out, and that is on the front weight and the wedge. You can see I've reduced both the front weight and wedge even more here on the truck, just to help the truck to rotate even better through the corner and maintain more speed. The trucks are very easy to drive, so grip is generally not an issue here, but I just wanted to get that car as dialed in as I could. And then the other change is the track bar. You can see the track bar isn't quite as high in the trucks as it was in Xfinity, because once I adjusted the front weight and wedge, it really got the truck to do what I wanted it to do. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. And remember, take care of those tires and they will take care of you.